was a phone call.
Okay.
So now it's back.
Thank you. There was a split, and it was Judah and Israel, the two parts. Then later, it was Palestine in the Roman period. Now, since 1948, there's Israel and Palestine. So anyway, it gets very complicated because Bethlehem is in the Palestinian control. Bethlehem is in the Palestinian controlled part of the country. But if you say Bethlehem, Israel, that's wrong and that's offensive. So if you're not sure where a place is and you don't want to offend, you say the Holy Land, Bethlehem in the Holy Land, or Jerusalem in the Holy Land, or you just say the Holy Land. It's holy to all three monotheistic religions. You aren't going to offend anybody by saying that, and you don't have to scramble through the politics of the whole thing. Likewise, who are the people of the land? In the earliest days, they were called the Hebrews, and later, after Judah and they all went down, and Joseph and Jacob and all the sons of Israel were down in Egypt, and then he came out. They were the Israelites. Later, after the Persian period, they were the Jews. So they weren't called Jews when they were under Moses. They were the Israelites. Now they're the Israelis and the Palestinians who live in the country for modern Israel and Palestine. So it can be a little complicated and a little bit political, but again, Holy Land or the inhabitants of the Holy Land. Okay, so then you're safe. So here we've got Israel and compared to just to show you how tiny it is. It's the size of it's compared to California, it's tiny. But most of the events of the Bible took place in land the size of Massachusetts. So I've superimposed, or I didn't, somebody else did, superimposed, I don't know how to do that, superimposed Massachusetts over this part of the world. And you see that God in his wisdom picked this particular spot, and we're going to try and figure out why. Now here's another view with modern Israel with the West Bank cut out. Again, that was how the map was, and Israel claims this land, it's disputed, whatever. So, but you just get, my point isn't politics right now, my point is the size comparison. It's small. And the politics is very complicated with very long history, but we can talk about the land of the Bible without necessarily getting into the politics of it. Now we're going to have a short map overview. And I want to give credit to this man down here, David Pawson, whose material this is. There is a geography of the Bible as well as a history of the Bible that we need to hold in our minds as we read the Bible. There are really only two maps that we need. A map of the whole Middle East and a map of the Promised Land in the Middle East. The name that is given to the map of the whole area inside this banana-shaped thing is the Fertile Crescent. It links two very large rivers at either end, the Nile and the Euphrates and the Tigris. And I finally learned which is which. Okay. I know we all know where the Nile is. If you're coming from Massachusetts and you're heading over here, they're in alphabetical order. Euphrates and then the Tigris. Okay, we usually say Tigris and Euphrates, but coming at them this way, Euphrates and the Tigris. There will be a quiz. Okay. Now, the Middle East in general, as we've said, is very dry and barren, but these are very fertile areas. The Nile Delta and the Tigris and Euphrates, because there is water, fresh water. There's a lot of water, but this is what? Salt water. Now, it used to be called Mesopotamia, the land between the rivers. These two areas were the centers of power in the ancient world. These were the East and West superpowers. the whole Old Testament is the struggle between these two world powers. That's going on in the background or the foreground throughout the whole Old Testament, between Egypt and the different empires that arose here, Assyria and later Babylon, and then later Persia, and in between the Promised Land. You'll notice that the Arabian Desert occupies this whole area and the Sahara Desert here. So when these two big powers attacked each other or tried to overcome each other, they had to travel through this narrow bit of land right here. They couldn't travel across the Arabian Desert because they couldn't possibly carry enough water for the trip. Yeah, Becky.
It just struck me that now I'm trying to picture where Rome is, and Rome can, I just never thought of how far away Rome is and had control over that area.
Yeah.
You just totally
It was the superpower later on. Yeah.
Wow.
Yep. And all the traffic was directed through this narrow strip, narrow coastal strip. When these two powers attacked each other, they had to travel through this strip. This was the crossroads of the world. Now, when you live on a highway that the superpowers have to cross, you're going to get run over. And so they get run over a lot. They're tempted to form alliances with Egypt or alliances here, but God deliberately put them there between these superpowers, not tucked way over here where nobody else lived, but right between these superpowers. So would they trust God, or would they form alliances with Egypt or, with some other superpower? Now, the road from Europe comes down the coast right here. It crosses the Jezreel Valley, and then it goes down the Jordan Valley and up onto the other side and over to Arabia. The road from Africa comes up the coastal plain, crosses through the Jezreel Valley, up, this is Capernaum up here, then up to Damascus, and on to India and China. You could say that the crossroads of the world is right here. Here's the Jezreel Valley. Overlooking these crossroads is a hill called Megiddo. The hill of Megiddo in Hebrew is Harmageddon, or Harmageddon. Many important battles have taken place here and in the valley down below. Most recently under General Allenby in World War I, fighting the Ottoman Empire. Overlooking this valley on the other side is the little village of Nazareth. You can imagine a young boy looking down in that valley and watching the world go by. It's like being in an airport lounge where you see all the nationalities of the world going by. That's why they call this northern area of the country Galilee of the nations or Galilee of the Gentiles. As an adult, Jesus moved from Nazareth over to Capernaum. But again, this is where this major route crossed right through Capernaum on a town right on the route of what's called the Via Maris. Further south is Jerusalem, up in them there are hills, and it was very Jewish. And in the New Testament times, it was more isolated than this area. Two parts of the Promised Land, the international part and this very Jewish, more isolated part. You can see the importance of this land. God was going to plant his people at the crossroads of the world where everyone could see them, where they could be a model of the kingdom of God on earth. So the whole world could see what a blessing comes from people living under God's world, under God's word, but also the judgment that came for disobeying God's rule. Now, you can go back here and think about the fact that all these people came and went through this land. Also, there were a lot of ites living in the land. The Amorites, the Amalekites, the Edomites, the Moabites. They were looking at Israel. They could see this land. As they obeyed this God, they could see the blessing that God would pour out on them. And Abraham and his descendants were called to be a blessing to the nations. Would they be a blessing to the nations if they were tucked way over in some corner of the world where nobody else lived? But no, they were deliberately in this area. Also, the message could spread as people came to faith and later into the Christian era. The message of Christ could spread through these major trade routes. Okay, now can you count backwards from 5 to 1? Everybody. 5,
4, 3, 2, 1.
All right, you have my outline for the next part of my talk. These numbers are going to help orient us to physical features of the land of Israel. I'm deeply indebted to Dr. James Fleming, under whom Jack and I studied. He taught us so much, and now he's based here in Georgia, but his study center was based right at Tantur, where we lived for our Jack's 2 sabbaticals there. All right, so 5. We're going to look briefly now at 5 geographical varieties in this very small Holy Land space. So we're not including like Egypt and some of the other places where some of the Bible events happened, but most of it happened right here. And here's one big takeaway. There's so much variety in this land. No matter where you live in the world and you are picking up this book, you're going to find a place that feels like home. You know, there's snow, there's desert, there's water, there's dry areas, there's busy cities, there are little villages out of the way, all kinds of variety that we don't have here in Massachusetts if the Bible had happened right here in our land. If the Bible had happened in West Texas, you know, one dot on the map and then another dot 200 miles away, there's not going to be much variety. I mean, I've driven through Texas. I haven't lived in Texas, but that's my impression, is that it's a lot of the same, but not so in this land. Okay, first variety. First variety is elevation. Remember, it's about the size of Massachusetts, but in it is a tall mountain, Mount Hermon, which is 9,000 feet tall. It's taller than our tallest mountain in New England, which is, who knows, Mark knew.
5,000.
Mount Washington? Yeah. 6,288. Mark knew it. Mark Godin knew it right to the money. But, surprise, surprise. Okay.
Yeah.
So people ski here today. Did you know that there's a snow-covered mountain in the Holy Land?
Wow, that's awesome.
Wow. Okay. But only 90 miles south, as the crow flies, is the Dead Sea. The Dead Sea is amazing. It's the lowest place on the surface of the earth. It's over 10,000 feet lower than Mount Hermon, a vertical drop of close to 2 miles. And what's the lowest place in New England?
Back Bay?
Sea level. Ta-da, sea level. Lowest place in the U.S.
Oh, in the desert?
Death Valley, right? Do you know how deep that is? How low that is?
230 feet.
You're close. It's 400. It's 400 feet. But the Dead Sea is 1,300 feet, the lowest place on the surface of the earth. So the first variety in Israel in the land of Israel is elevation. The second is climate. And we've already talked about rain, but rainfall is a big part of climate anywhere. Jerusalem is the kind of the midpoint between the coastal plain, which is wetter, and then the drier areas off toward the desert, toward the wilderness of Judea. And they get 24 inches of rain, about the same as London, but the rain basically comes during 5 months per year, and 7 months with no rain at all. Dew is an important part of the moisture. Even when the rain stops for the season, some areas get a heavy dewfall coming off the Mediterranean Sea as the water evaporates and then condenses on the cold items when things cool off at night. And the dew is important because If there were no rain in the winter season, the grass and the early crops don't grow. If there's no dew in the summer, the later crops dry up and the fruit doesn't mature. And dew appears in some places in the Bible. Now, there are vastly different climate zones within 100 miles. And we have above the timberline, we have oasis, we have desert. Some areas of the country are high and wet, others are low and dry. And again, we're talking about the size of Massachusetts. So rainfall is a really big deal, and it drives a lot of the narrative of the Bible. So rainfall is associated with famine. If the rain stops, there's going to be famine. Abraham and Sarah enter the promised land in Genesis 12, and what greets them? Welcome to the promised land. There's a famine right away. And they go down to Egypt. Why do people always go down to Egypt when there's famine? The Nile Delta and the Nile River, so there's always water. Well, usually there's always water, but anyway, famine drives them down to Egypt, and part of the story takes place there. Then later, Joseph is sold into slavery in Egypt, and his brothers later follow when famine and drought hit the promised land again. And so all the sons of Jacob go down to Israel, or down to Egypt, and they're there, and then the Exodus brings them out. So again, that's driven by the lack of rainfall. Also under Elijah, there was a drought. We have Jesus telling the story of the prodigal son who's off in the far country, and then famine hits, i.e. drought, and he wants to go home and eat his father's carrot pods. They're pods that pigs usually eat. All right, now let's think about, keep putting on our different lenses for looking at, put on your wet and dry rainfall lenses. Don't think about it in terms of wet New England. Even in areas that receive almost no rain, the dew still can make enough little plant growth that sheep can graze. And the shepherd has to work hard to find areas to take the sheep. So most of the grazing area in the Bible are the wilderness of Judea, which is a 12-mile wide area between the Dead Sea and the hills around Jerusalem. Now, you look at this and you see variations, okay? The south-facing slopes don't get the green growing on it because the dew, any moisture would dry up before anything can grow. You see, there's some green there. But don't think of sheep in the nice rolling hills of Pennsylvania, okay? No, this is not what it looks like. If you have land that fertile, that can grow that much, you're going to grow crops there and not turn it over to your sheep. Now, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. It's not abstract. The Lord is a shepherd. The Lord is my shepherd. That was the Hebrew way of thinking. He makes me lie down in green pastures. Green pastures, okay? Green pastures, okay? Not the Pennsylvania shot I showed you. Now, shepherd, a lot of the shepherd can be male or female. So think about Rebecca, Rachel, Zipporah, who were shepherds in the book of Genesis and Exodus, women. And when we lived there, we saw girls and boys and men, not so much women, not so much older women, but boys, male and female, can be shepherds. So don't think, oh, the Bible's just full of all this male imagery. We need to understand more that, yeah, this can be male or female imagery. The Lord is my shepherd, but, it can relate to both men and women. All right, so what kind of green pasture is this? But look at this. See that little bit of green there? Okay, little bits, but not here, but little bits. Okay, here's another shepherd girl. And a lot of the animals that they herded were not, or shepherded were goats as well as sheep. So sheep and the goats, you read about that. And there are a lot of black goats because the black would protect the goats from the ultraviolet radiation, so they'd be more likely to survive and live and reproduce. A lot of the tents were made out of goat hair, so they would be black, and it would be black clothing would protect people from ultraviolet radiation, so you'd actually be healthier wearing black, and people would live longer. Now, after abundant rainfall, the wilderness can look like this, but as soon as the rains stop, the shepherd's going to have to look really hard to find grazing ground. Now, this is a Bedouin encampment. This would be people like the time of Abraham and the patriarchs setting up their tents and then taking them down and moving them, and with their dark, probably dark goats there. So the first variety that we had was elevation. The second was climate, and we talked about rainfall especially. The third is vegetation. There are a lot of varieties of flowers, for example. In hills around Jerusalem, we saw this. The rains come in the winter, and then in March, the hillsides are covered with the lilies of the field. And then the rains stop in April, and they dry up, and they're all gone by May. The grass withers, the flower fades, but the word of our God lasts forever. So this is how it looked in Jerusalem in March, but by May it was all gone. Lots of varieties of animals and birds in the Holy Land. A lot of animals come from Europe, Asia, and Africa in this crossroads. 1,200 species of birds and 600 species come through migrating. Is there a birder here? Could you tell me how many species of birds in Massachusetts? But certainly not that many. So a good place to go if you're a birder. 97 species of mammals. It's like, oh, Robin, stop just spouting these boring statistics. But I'm trying to compare it with what we've got here. The Massachusetts Division of Fisheries and Wildlife states that we have 60 native mammals who are potentially present in the state. So there are more, 1.5 times in the Holy Land. Why so many? 3 continents touch here, okay? Africa, Europe, and Asia. This is Southwest Asia. We usually think of it as the Middle East, but it's technically part of Asia, and you see it's connected. See? So it's connected. So animals can come from all these different areas and can potentially walk here. Now, kangaroos cannot get to the United States unless they're brought, okay? But see, animals from all these different areas can come, and they meet on this little land bridge. Now, I'll just tell you about one animal, the camel. It's an amazing animal. It can drink 15 gallons of water in 15 minutes. The last group was asking how many gallons of water in a bathtub. I don't know. Does anybody know? Jim, 70 gallons in a bathtub. Okay. So what's that? A fifth of a bathtub? I don't know. You do the math. But it starts out skinny, but it drinks the water, and then it looks all plumped up and muscular looking, all ripped and huge. Okay, so another variety that we have there is geology, and the land of Israel sits on top of a giant scar in the earth, the Syrian-African rift, where we've got various tectonic plates coming together and pushing in different directions. Think of the San Andreas Fault, only more so. The Syrian-African rift extends from Armenia way up here, all the way down deep into Africa and Mozambique. The variation in elevation is due to this movement of the tectonic plates moving and scraping against one another. Now, this plate is, the Arabian plate is moving north, and this plate is moving south. So we've got changes, we've got earthquakes that happen. Way up north in Armenia, the land is more brittle, and in 1988 there was a horrible earthquake. It killed up to 50,000 people. They don't tend to be that dramatic down here because the earth can shift little bits more often. But you have geologic activity, you have hot springs in the land, you know, you've got great big Mount Hermon, and the Dead Sea is so low. It's all because of this plate activity. Now, let's talk about the stone here. This is all limestone, and there's lots and lots of limestone in this part of the country. This is Jerusalem. This is the Dome of the Rock that sits on a site that's holy to Muslims, but this is where Solomon's temple, Herod's temple, Jesus would have gone to the temple there. He did a lot of his teaching there. The site of the crucifixion is nearby. It's inside the city now. It was outside the city walls at the time of Christ. I'm going to show you a close-up of this wall just so you get an idea. This is the famous Western Wall. It used to be called the Wailing Wall. It's not called the Wailing Wall now. They're not wailing anymore since 1967 when the Israelis took possession of this, so they're not wailing anymore. But this is not the wall of the temple from the time of Christ. It's the wall of a retaining wall that was built around the top of the mountain, and then it was all filled in to make a great big platform to build the temple on it. So all that remains from the time of Christ is the retaining wall. This part is later, but these big stones are from the time of Christ. There's a law in Jerusalem that all buildings have to be faced with Jerusalem limestone to preserve the beauty of the city. Now you get an idea of how big these stones are. They're huge. These are from the time of Herod. They all had this little margin around it. That's how you can tell. But this can help us understand the verse. Jesus said, or Mark 13, it says, and as he, Jesus, came out of the temple, one of the disciples said to him, look, teacher, what wonderful stones and what wonderful buildings. Do you remember Jesus' response? He said, do you see these great buildings? There will not be left here one stone upon another that will not be thrown down. These stones were pushed overboard from on top. Up here, they were pushed overboard, and that's what you're seeing to this day. These are great, big, huge things, and they've been sitting there for 2,000 years.
Those rocks right there?
Yeah, they've been sitting there for 2,000 years. Yeah. So it's a fulfillment of the prophecy that Jesus said, not one stone will be left on another. But you say, what about these? No, he prophesied the destruction of the temple, not the destruction of the retaining wall that supported the platform that the temple was built on. So his words were fulfilled in 70 AD. Now I'm going to show you the rock in the northern part of the country, up in Galilee. We're almost done. We're going to go quick, but if you have to leave, you have to leave. This is basalt rock, and it's black, and it's volcanic. Now remember, the tectonic plates rubbing against it created volcanic activity here in the past. Now this is all basalt rock, okay? You see it's dark rock, and who cares that it's dark rock? Come on, Robin, we're talking about the Bible. But this is a ruin of the village of Capernaum. They've extensively excavated here, and you can see it looks kind of bright in the light, but it's dark rock. Now think about it. The Sea of Galilee, where Jesus spent most of his ministry, is 600 feet below sea level. So think about it. When Jesus came down from heaven, we say it in the Creed, became incarnate of the Virgin Mary's made man. He came down to 600 feet below sea level. And that's where he spent much of his ministry, below sea level. He came down just about as far as you possibly can on the surface of the earth. And he certainly would have walked down the Jordan Valley, which was even lower. Now think about a house made out of basalt, out of this dark rock, without electric lights. Oil for lamps would have been very precious and not used, you wouldn't have had lights burning all the time. Little bitty lamps with a little bitty wick. Jesus said, what woman having 10 silver coins, if she loses one coin, does not light a lamp and sweep the house and seek diligently until she finds it? If she had lost a dark coin in a dark rock house, she would need to light a lamp to find it. Now, let's go on to this. What was the occupation of Joseph and Jesus? Everybody knows they were carpenter. You picture them sawing and everything. Well, the word in, and I'm not going to say he's not a carpenter, but I think the word is let me show you the word in Greek. It's tekton, and it just means builder or construction worker. It doesn't specify what the medium that he was working in. So there was lots and lots of stone, not lots and lots of trees. They wouldn't be cutting down their olive trees that produced the olives that they ate and the oil that they used for their lamps and for their making bread. They wouldn't cut down an olive tree to make things out of, if they could make it out of stone. So 70% of our state is covered with trees. Did you know that? 70%. More than in colonial trees at a time. We have more trees now than we used to. But there, in the King James day, when the Bible was first translated, early translation in English, the main building material was wood. So they translated it carpenter. But it's safer to say they were construction workers. If you had oxen and you needed a new yoke for your oxen, Joseph and Jesus could come over and measure and make a custom yoke to fit your oxen, and they'd make it out of wood. But if they're building a house, they would make it out of stone and not out of wood. And the village was very teeny tiny, so probably not a lot of work there. But nearby was the town of Sepphoris. That was a lot of Roman activity, a lot of building going on there. They may have walked over there a few miles and worked there as construction workers. I don't know for sure, but it's interesting. I think probably there's some people here who are working construction with wood, but others who maybe work with other kinds of construction. This broadens the term. More men, more women can relate to the term if it's a construction worker, I think, than if it's just a carpenter with just fine woodworking. So I think that's an encouraging thing to think. Jesus was a man who worked with his hands. Also, think about the physique of somebody who's not power tools to cut that rock. Okay, what would his physique have been like?
He was very strong.
He probably would have been pretty big,
Yeah.
muscular upper body. You know, again, speculation, it doesn't matter, we don't have pictures of Jesus. But he wasn't just sitting there twiddling his hands and thinking thoughts about God. I mean, he was working hard with his body up until the time he started his ministry, and then he was walking all over the country. I mean, he was probably pretty physically fit, which is encouraging for people who are into, you know, I don't know, bodybuilding and fitness and stuff, but
Would you call him, maybe better would even be Mason? I mean, because I think of a
he
Mason.
could have been a Mason.
I was
He
gonna
could have
say
been a
that.
Mason.
Yeah,
Because
yeah.
my name's Mason. So.
Oh, there we go.
Yeah.
You know, but he could have worked with wood, and he
Everything,
probably was a jack of all trades, or a Jesus of all trades. Okay. Now, let's go on. The 4, 3, 2, 1 are going to be quick. The four C's, the Mediterranean, we all know that, okay? And you dip your finger in, what does it taste like? Okay, it's just a few percentage points salt, but you can't water things with it. Then the Red Sea, which is down here, okay? And that comes into the story of the Exodus. We don't know exactly where it was, but somewhere down in here. Then the Dead Sea, which is right here. Now, it's drying up because a lot of the fresh water isn't making it into the Dead Sea, because it's sort of dumb to let fresh water just go in there. So the Israelis and Palestinians are getting it for their use up there. Now, 2 family members who were here years ago. You recognize that? Nick's bumper sticker, but Nick's first beat. Anyway, this is the Dead Sea. So nothing, it's called the Dead Sea because nothing can live in it. The Jordan River flows into the Dead Sea, but ordinarily a river would flow into a lake and then it would have an outlet on the other side. But remember, it's 1,300 feet below sea level, okay? So the water can't flow out into the Mediterranean Sea. Otherwise it could be a fresh lake and it would be much more useful. The Dead Sea is a super saturated body of water. It cannot hold any more salt. There's undissolved salt in it, and you can't sink in it. That's the fun tourist activity, you know, but beware if you've got any cuts or something, because it really stings. And also you need water shoes to walk on the salt-crusted rocks on the shore. Now, the ability of a liquid to hold mineral salts depends on the temperature. Hot tea can absorb more sugar than iced tea. Likewise, the Dead Sea. In the summer, it can be 33 or 34% salt. In the winter, it's like 32%. Then it crystallizes out. There are lots of references to salt in the Bible. Now, along the shores of the Dead Sea are places you can gather salt. The Israelis have these salt, this is a NASA photograph. These are evaporation ponds. So the water is pumped in, it evaporates, they pump more in, and they get sodium chloride and potassium salts, and the minerals are hugely, hugely valuable. But at the time of the Bible, they had a different system. They didn't have that. Along the shores of the Dead Sea are places you can gather salt, but the shoreline is dirty. What you did in the past, you'd go to the marketplace, there would be scooped up dirt and salt in a bag that had been shoveled up. You'd buy some. Jesus said when the salt has lost its flavor. Salt doesn't lose its flavor, but when the lump of dirt and salt, you pick out the salt, use it in your cooking, pick out the salt, use it in your preserving. When you've picked out all the salt, what's left?
Oh, the dirt. That's so
Dirt. And the roads were dirt, the street paths were dirt. You throw it out on the dirt path and it's trampled underfoot by people. So salt is very valuable for flavoring food, but also for preserving. Remember, they didn't have refrigeration. And so can we as believing Christians be a preservative around us? Can we bring flavor? Can we, spice things up, whatever? Can we make a difference in the lives of people around us? All right, and the last sea is the Sea of Galilee. That's from the earth, from space. It's fresh water. And here's a view of it. Most of Jesus' ministry took place on the shores of the Sea of Galilee, right here in this little, we call it the Gospel Triangle between Chorazin, Bethsaida, and Capernaum, just a few square miles. Most of the ministry of the Son of God on earth took place here in this little area. He didn't ever, as far as we know, never went into Tiberias. It was a Roman city. He did go over into, remember, associations with place names. Gergesa, the Gerasene demoniac, this was a Gentile area. Okay, the Romans controlled this. Tiberias doesn't appear in the Gospels. The last, we've got 5, 4, 3 continents. We've already talked about this. 3 continents come together in this area, which accounts for a lot of the diversity in animal life. Also the people going through here on the highways, going through, carrying the message of the Jews and the Israelites, and then later the message of Jesus, going on this highway to all these different continents and all these different countries. Now, to the east is this vast desert, and here's this vast desert. You can't cross that. You can, but you can't possibly carry enough water for your pack animals. So all the travel is going to go right through there. And then we're down to 1. Do you want to guess what the 1 is? It helps us with our overview of the whole land. When it's a short word and it starts with G.
God.
Would you say?
God.
One God. Yeah. So all that variety, but not variety in gods. We don't have multiple gods. We have one God that we worship. And in His wisdom, He's given us the Bible, and the land is still there. You can visit it, but we can learn about it on the internet. You can just go and learn about all this stuff. And it's just opens up so much to helping us understand our faith. So thank you for coming.
For Doc today,
I know, right?
so thanks for coming.